thyself is to love thyself, is to examine, observe, and respect thyself. It's an ongoing process, never to be explained in a brief synopsis. It's a preoccupation with reflection and revelation that can only be achieved through discipline and determination.
Hello and welcome to the Encouraging Word Show. I'm your host, Jamila Freelain, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Today I have a very, very special topic, and for those of you who haven't seen the show before, you are in for a treat. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but mental health is something that's oftentimes overlooked, and particularly as it relates to college campuses and people planning and preparing for college. So today I'm honored to have a special guest here, Miss Chantelle Davis-Johnson. She is a licensed professional counselor, yes, and she's also the owner of Soul Care Christian Counseling Services.
That's it.
Okay, I had to make sure y'all see I had to practice, right? So I'm honored to have her here today. Now, if you're new to the show and this is your first time watching, let me tell you a little bit about the Encouraging Word Show because I want to give you some background. Essentially, this show is based on a book that I created called Free Money for College, and that book was meant to be a tool and a resource for students and parents. And one of the things that I've learned in over 20 years of doing different roles professionally in higher education is that people come to the table with so many maybe misconceptions about how to plan for college and that sort of thing, and oftentimes they leave out the financial planning piece. They sometimes leave out the emotional health and wellness piece that's necessary to be successful in college as well, and sometimes they don't understand maybe how to plan academically. So with the book, that's basically filled with tips and resources, and the book is really, this show is an extension of the book, essentially. And today's show is really about empowerment. Matter of fact, that's the word for today. Okay. And so to start off, we're going to talk about some of the different types of mental health challenges that relate to the academic world, particularly with college and career planning. We're not going to cover the whole spectrum, ladies and gentlemen, but we'll be able to touch on some things. So learning disabilities is really the first thing that I want to speak about. And just in doing research for the show, that sort of thing, I want to share with you a few quotes, or not quotes, but statistics, just to kind of give you some insight and ideas about how prevalent it is. First of all, if you suffer from a learning disability, you are in good company. There's a lot of people who have learning disabilities, and oftentimes they're undiagnosed until someone gets to be maybe 18 or 20 or 25. So by the time they get to college, it may be because they didn't have any idea or any inkling that they had this learning disability, that now they're experiencing even more frustration, or they think something's wrong with them simply because things were undiagnosed. 1 in 5 students, or 15 to 20% of the population, has a language disability. So oftentimes those children who have trouble speaking or have trouble reading oftentimes have dyslexia that has gone undiagnosed. And it's important to know this because oftentimes those children go around feeling that there's something wrong with them, or that they're stupid, or they feel less than, and oftentimes they're picked on or bullied even, which is seriously a problem. So if you can know this ahead of time, it makes a world of difference. Now I want to jump in and talk to you. Have you had any individuals maybe who were parents of a child with a learning disability, or have you counseled anyone with a learning disability?
We work with a large number of people with different types of disabilities, but learning disabilities, we have worked with a lot of them. I also have personal experience with learning disability in my family. Okay. My sister, she had a cerebral hemorrhage when she was 5. She had to learn to walk and talk again the second time. Wow. And then when she was 12, she had an aneurysm, 2 back-to-back brain surgeries.
At 12?
At 12.
Okay, my goodness.
2 back-to-back brain surgeries that left her paralyzed again, and she had to learn to walk and talk a 3rd time. Wow. And along with that came, some cognitive challenges and neurological problems. So I watched firsthand, you know, her experiences of trying to get through school, through high school, and she also later went to college. So I'm very familiar.
Okay. Now, was she able to successfully finish? Did that school have a lot of accommodations for her?
They did. They did. When she did go to college, they had student services or special services for students.
Support services.
And student support services. And so she used that. She was able to get extra time for her test.
Good.
She was able to get someone to come in with her to class to take her notes. And they had tutoring, so they had a lot of different services. And most colleges have that available.
Right. To some extent. Some have it more than others.
Right.
So that's one
true.
of the things that I always encourage students and parents to research, and particularly if you've identified that you have a learning disability, the sooner you can start planning, the better. The more research you can do, the better, because again, all colleges are not the same. Created equally, trust. So one college, what works for one person may not work for another person, and the last thing you want to do is wait until you actually get on campus to find that out, because by then it's costing you money. And again, we always want to reduce that or eliminate it. Now, 30% of children with dyslexia also have a mild form of ADHD, and approximately 25% of children with ADHD also have dyslexia. So I found that to be very interesting. So again, it's actually a lot more common than most people realize, and it's good to know that. Now, of course, we've talked about things like dyslexia, and we talked about the cognitive disorders and issues or challenges that your sister faced, and she essentially was able to overcome those and graduate from college.
She did, and it took a lot of support from different places and research, like you said, trying to figure out, how to do things, and just knowledge of like what was available. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which gives a lot of information of what you should be able to have access to as far as services. Correct. She did get through, and she graduated.
Which is wonderful. That's a success story, because there are many who don't have, there are many that don't have that support, that have a disability, or even worse, don't have maybe any disability, but because maybe they didn't recognize that they had a challenge, or maybe just due to life circumstances, they weren't able to finish. So kudos to her for that. Now, we want to switch gears a little bit in the learning disability realm. Of course, I talked a little bit and gave some statistics on ADHD and also on the area of dyslexia. Let's talk a little bit about the autism spectrum as well, because that's something I know that's come up. Seems to be more prevalent, and I don't know if it's because there's an increase or there's more awareness. It's kind of, I guess, hit or miss depending on who you ask.
Right.
Can you tell me a little more about autism, or do you know anything?
Well, that's not really one of my specialties, but we do get in our counseling practice some individuals that have autism, and sometimes it has not been diagnosed, and it could mirror like some mental health disorders.
Gotcha.
And so usually an individual, in order for them to be properly diagnosed, because a lot of people are not diagnosed correctly that have autism, they usually need to maybe see a psychologist, a doctor, have a battery of tests done to see if that is what they have truly.
And that was actually, speaking as a professional, I wanted to come straight to the source and find out, well, if someone suspected maybe that their son or daughter had autism, as a child, they may be showing different signs or symptoms of something. So in a case like that, maybe going to, you said a psychologist could be
They might, as the young lady mentioned earlier in another show, start with their medical doctor. And talk to the doctor, because they oftentimes are the gateway to people getting the services that they need, and they have a lot of resources. So a parent might take them to their medical doctor, or they might want to speak to someone if they're in school. If they're not in school, they may want to speak to a psychologist or psychiatrist, and maybe they can start there.
Okay, so that's good to know. Start with your medical doctor first, and then they can maybe make recommendations from there.
Yes.
And something else that I like that you mentioned when you went back to the example of your sister is you mentioned for her there were some adjustments that were made, and I know in some of my experiences in working with a wide array of students, sometimes they did have challenges or learned differently, and typically in order for you to have those accommodations made for you on the college level, you have to have an IEP.
Yes.
Can you speak to that or what that is exactly?
Like an individualized education plan. You do need that, and that usually includes like a battery of tests.
Okay.
So depending on what type of disability that you may have or challenges you may have, a psychologist, you might go to them to administer a battery of tests. Some schools have departments where they can help children get these battery of tests, or your doctor or a psychiatrist, a medical professional can have these tests done, and then then it'll become like a verifiable disability.
And that's the big thing too. You have to document it. When you go to the college, if let's say, for example, you have challenges reading, it's not enough to say, hey, I have challenges reading. Can I get 2 hours on the test instead of 1? You have to have it documented. So you have to be able to show that it was diagnosed. And once it's diagnosed as well by a professional, then it also has to be documented. So you want to keep that documentation, because that can be the crutch that really, really helps you, and not I guess maybe not to use even the word crutch. That could be the thing that is your saving grace and helps you to really, overcome some of the challenges and rigors of college.
Yeah, because when you have that documentation, that verifiable disability, like the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, has certain laws that apply to you, and so you have certain rights based on that verifiable disability.
Absolutely.
The more time on tests, or maybe somebody to take your notes, or different accommodations that they have to make.
Absolutely, and that goes with mental as well as physical as well. So good to know, good to know. And then one last thing, just to talk about autism in relation to that, and then we're going to go to a break and come back. But almost half, or about 44% of the children that are identified with ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, have average to above average intellectual ability. And I think that is very important to state that, because oftentimes when you meet someone that's on that autism spectrum, you think of them as maybe less than intellectually. And a lot of times it's not a situation where they're any less intelligent than you. They learn differently, and their social skills may be very different, but they're very, very intelligent, and I think it's important to know that as well. About 1 in 68 children in the U.S. have been identified with some aspect or some range, or on some range of the autism spectrum disorder, and that's according to the CDC. So before we wrap up with talking about some of those learning disabilities, did you have anything else maybe to note about those?
Just if you are a parent and you suspect that your child might have them, the earlier that they are diagnosed and the earlier that you get help, the better off that child's chances of being successful going through the entire education system is. So the earlier it's diagnosed, the better.
I agree. I want to wrap up this segment with a quick quote that I always love from Albert Einstein, and essentially it's that everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life thinking it's stupid. I want to thank you for watching. Come on back after the break, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges and some of the ways that you can resolve some issues with mental illness as it relates to college and career planning. Thanks for tuning in to the Encouraging Words Show, and I am glad you're with me. Now, I wanted to talk to you today a little bit more about mental health issues as it relates to college and career planning. Now, I have a special guest with me today. I have Miss Chantelle Davis-Johnson. She is a licensed professional counselor, and she's actually the owner of Soul Care Christian Counseling Services. I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah. Good job.
Thank you. Now, we're talking about mental health challenges and really how you can best prepare. One of the things that I think of in terms of college and career planning is that you really need to plan and prepare as early as possible. You don't wait till your junior or senior year, or you don't wait till you get into college to try and figure things out. You don't want to set yourself up for failure. It reminds me of the quote that people often say, and this is kind of tied in actually to something Dr. Honey mentioned earlier in her show taping today. She was talking about marriage, and I think a lot of people, when they plan for marriage, they don't really plan for marriage, they plan for the wedding. And I think that when it comes down to college, they often do the same thing. They don't plan for graduation, they just plan to get there. They'll spend more time on the high school graduation party and prom as opposed to college. And it's unfortunate that we take that particular method, because really when it comes down to it, college can really set you up for success in a number of different ways. And just as planning for college can set you up in a number of ways to be successful, also planning and making sure that you're very careful and strategic if you have some mental challenges or have had some things that you've encountered mentally and emotionally that you need to overcome. It can help you a tremendous amount if you're ahead of the game with that. So we're going to jump right in. I want to start off with the statistic, and the first thing we're going to talk about in this segment is substance abuse. For 2012, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reports that 21.3% of young adults between 18 to 25 used illicit drugs. Now, why did I particularly pull out that quote? Because that's actually the cornerstone of the college age. The traditional college student is right in that age. And substance abuse, as well as, whether we're talking underage drinking or whether we're talking experimental use of prescription drugs, those are huge and growing problems on college campuses all across the nation. So we want to address some of those things. Of that same age group, 3.8% admitted to using psychotherapeutic drugs for non-medical purposes. So can we talk a little bit about that? Let's jump in. Do you deal with those who have abused maybe various substances, or is that another area? Or
we deal with that as well.
Okay.
And oftentimes substance abuse or misuse, it kind of coexists with mental health issues. So a lot of the population that we work with do have substance abuse concerns.
So are they self-medicating, or what is that about?
A lot of times that is the case. I think, we talk about the stigma with mental health, where a lot of people are embarrassed or ashamed to say that they are having a mental health issue or some distress. And so they, if they're experiencing some anxiety or depression, they may not even know what the symptoms are or know what they're experiencing. They just know they don't feel good. And so they may, seek out some help with alcohol or pills to help themselves feel better, and then a lot of times it becomes a problem.
Wow. So as a consequence of them trying to maybe overcome some things,
some mental health challenges or distress. Yes.
And I think it's important to mention that and to raise and address these issues, because if we look at some of the different things like active shooters on college campuses and that sort of thing, these are oftentimes not strangers. These are students who attend those colleges. And again, the students are obviously intelligent enough to get into the school, but because there may be breaks or triggers sometimes at the college or university that they may attend, or there may be some anxiety issues that were undisclosed or went just kind of overlooked, that sort of thing. Things that could be addressed aren't addressed, and unfortunately it ends up maybe in the loss of lives.
Right. It's a really huge problem, and the statistics that you quoted are for that age group across the board. But for college kids, the statistics for substance abuse, alcohol abuse, drug abuse are even higher.
Now that I believe.
Are even higher. So non-college kids have a lower rate of substance abuse.
That's interesting.
So college itself
so
is
the
a risk
incident
factor.
rate, the incident rate or the occurrence of substance abuse is even higher among college students.
If they're going to use, yes, it is.
What would you attribute that to? Is it because there's a greater level of stress being on a college campus? Is it just you're away from home and it's, okay, I got to try something new? What would you attribute that to as a counselor?
I would say a number of factors contribute to it. When you leave home and you go into college, I think the stress levels are definitely higher.
Yes.
And a lot of young people, they may not have had mental health distress or anything before that, But when they get to college, you know, the increased responsibilities, that freedom, you know, not being under their parents' care. Now you got to make your own decisions. Decisions. There's parties, you know, and so alcohol and drugs are more readily available.
Very true.
And, you know, and just not knowing how to care for yourself. So it's a lot of different factors
that go into that. It's not just one and done type of thing. It's many different factors that contribute. Okay. And what would you say then in order to overcome maybe substance abuse or even being preventative, what advice would you give a student that might be watching the show, or a parent perhaps, to share with their student or student?
I think something that you said earlier, like the earlier you start to prepare for college, the better off you'll be. And so I think, you know, before, if your plan is to go to college, like do some research on what it's like to be in college. What are some things that you need to expect? If you're a parent, maybe taking your child to different college campuses so they can kind of get a feel for the environment. And then just, I would say to parents, you know, you do some research, you know, on what it's like for a kid to be in college, and you try to start to prepare your child for that. Because sometimes with parents, like, we may treat our child like a child until the time that they're ready to go to college.
Right. So we throw them to the wolves sometimes.
Yeah, and we haven't prepared them for being independent.
And I can tell you, I've seen that a number of times.
And so have I, and it's really unfortunate. And so, like, if you're a parent, like, at some point you kind of have to give your child opportunities to be independent.
Right.
Make some decisions on their own, make some mistakes on their own.
Of course.
Under your covering, where you can kind of help walk them through it.
Right.
And just, you know, be open and honest with them about the realities of being an adult.
Right.
And the responsibilities that come with that.
Yes. I think college is definitely an opportunity for a young adult to get their sea legs, so to speak. You kind of, you know, steady yourself and really you come into your own, really.
Right.
But again, with that comes some pressure, and depending on, you know, the circumstances they were coming from, it can sometimes be a shock to the system.
It's a huge transition because a lot of times we're taught that college should be some of the best years of your life.
Right.
But then you get there, you have the increased pressures of all of this work.
Right.
You may come from a small town. You may have culture shock when you get there.
Absolutely.
Maybe you might have been the valedictorian at your school, but then you go to a facility or education place, and you're amongst hundreds of valedictorians. And so the competition,
everybody's smart.
There's a lot of distress. There's another statistic I wanted to mention. There was a study done where 80% of the college students that were interviewed admitted to having some kind of mental distress while in school.
And you know what I do know for a fact is the more, how should I say, rigorous the school, the more competitive the school, the higher the levels of anxiety tend to be.
It is. It is. And it's good to know what mental distress looks like, because sometimes people don't really know what. And the most popular ones are depression and anxiety, with anxiety being the most prevalent mental distress or mental illness. It's good to know what the symptoms are, so that when you start to experience it, or if you see someone experiencing it, you might be able to, you know, identify it and get some help.
Absolutely. Okay. So we want to transition from talking about anxiety and depression to the most extreme form, which is speaking of suicide. And just to talk a little bit about suicide, here's a statistic that was taken in 2013. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, according to the ADAA. Now, it is the second leading cause of death in college students in the United States. And that's based on an American College Health Association report. Can you speak to that statistic?
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate one. For the 18 to 25-year-old age range, the same college cohort group. Yes, suicide, like you said, is the second leading cause of death. And a lot of that is because going to college and the stress that it causes when people don't get help, it can get ultimately to that point where they just feel a sense of hopelessness. You know, things are not going to change. This is how my life is going to be. And there's another statistic where it says every day somewhere on a college campus in America that someone is committing suicide. And like I said, the more rigorous academic programs,
yes,
the numbers are higher.
Absolutely.
So it's a huge issue.
Huge issue. Okay. What are some of the symptoms someone should look for if it's let's say if I'm talking to a college student right now and they fear maybe that their roommate or their frat brother or sister could be experiencing suicidal thoughts. What are some of the symptoms?
Yes, there are definitely usually some signs. Every once in a while, somebody might do something out the blue and people say, we didn't see any signs. But most of the time, there are some subtle signs that you can look for. Might be some extreme changes in mood or behavior.
Okay.
So someone that they might just start being like really angry all the time.
Oh, okay.
Or someone
sudden like mood swing.
Sudden mood swings, okay. Or just that they don't normally exhibit.
Right.
Person makes some personality changes. So somebody that is normally outgoing, they might become withdrawn or isolated. Okay. All of a sudden just wanting to stay in the room, not being bothered. Or someone who's usually like shy might be all outgoing all of a sudden. Some other things that people might do, if they feel like they're not going to be around, they may start to give away all of their things.
Okay, and I've heard that before.
Or they may start to try to make amends with people and start telling everyone, how much they love them, they care about them, and no matter what happens, just always know that I love you. And so trying to make amends with the different people around them, almost like they're trying to prepare them for what they're considering.
Okay, so those are kind of things to kind of look for. Just a few. Okay. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I was doing some research, because of course the whole purpose in the show is to help someone and empower them with knowledge, and so some of the things that I thought here were really, really cool, and please, as I'm speaking, top right in because I know you have a lot of knowledge. One of the suggestions is if you suspect a friend or a loved one is maybe suffering from suicidal thoughts, that sort of thing, it's just to point blank ask them. It may be uncomfortable, it may feel confrontational, but literally just asking them directly can really begin the conversation and could potentially save their lives.
Yeah, and that's true, because sometimes we might think, well, maybe I don't want to say the word suicide because it might give them thought if they weren't thinking about it, but usually it's the opposite. That's not true. So you do want to ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself? Like,
so if somebody's already in that state of mind, they're typically just very honest with saying, yes, that is okay.
That's good to be honest, and watch your facial expression because you want to be as non-judgmental as possible.
Right. Okay.
And so you don't want to get like, overly excited or anything. You want to stay calm and speak calmly and just matter of fact about it.
Okay, and I love that you said that because I could see somebody's reaction freaking out, which could potentially maybe turn that person off or keep them from divulging further information. Make safety a priority. So if they answer yes, or if they answer positively to that first question, are you considering killing yourself? Ask them if they have a plan. So if, for example, maybe how well thought out it is, why would that be beneficial?
Because you're trying to judge for like the level of risk.
Okay.
Like how serious they are about it, although we can never know.
Right.
But you're just trying to assess, the risk level of the situation. Okay. If they have a plan, if they really are intending, or if they're just, just saying, oh, I don't feel like being here. I just wish I wouldn't wake up.
Wow.
Have they planned how they're going to do it?
Right.
Do they have the means to do it?
And what you want to do is, in that case, you want to remove those things?
You want to remove those things, but you also, for us as counselors, we're bound by law to report it to authorities, and we usually let them know ahead of time. But if you're not a counselor, you want to try to remove those things and give them some help.
Okay. And what does that look like then? Do you call 911, or how does, if you are saying you help that person, and let's say I'm encountering that situation, I've just spoken with someone, and they say, yeah, indeed, I am looking to kill myself, or I was thinking of taking some pills tomorrow, or what have you. If somebody was to say that to me, what should my response then be to that person?
Like I said, you don't want to get overly excited, and you want to be non-judgmental. And so you don't want to say, things like, things will be better tomorrow, or just get over it, or shake it off, or just get some sleep. Right. So you want to take them very seriously, and you just want to communicate that you care about them. I really care about you, and I see that you're not yourself. Right. And I think, it'd be beneficial if you talk to someone or get some help, or let me help you. I'll go with you. reach out and show concern.
Okay, wow, I love that. I think that definitely could be instrumental and make the difference, because oftentimes if somebody's in that state of mind, they may feel like they don't have anything to live for. So you saying you care, if you're addressing a person in that situation, could make all the difference in the world.
Right. And I just want to add to.
Oh no, please do.
Yeah, and maybe even calling 911, because the people on the line, they're trained to handle suicide.
You know, I didn't realize that.
Or calling the suicide hotline.
Okay. And the suicide hotline, I'm glad you mentioned that. So the suicide hotline, if you someone you know may be seemingly in this state of mind, one of the best things that you could do is to call for help for them, because these are trained professionals. And the number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. I want to give you that number again, and please write it down just to kind of keep it handy. 1-800-273-8255. The last thing it says to do is to remain in contact with that person. Yes. So why would that be instrumental, or why would that be helpful?
Just for them to know that somebody cares, and just to have that ongoing care and concern and showing understanding. And just because they maybe got through that bout, if they have, lingering depression or mental illness, it may be an ongoing issue that they're going to have to deal with.
Okay. Well, that's our time for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to this invaluable show, and we want to really say how much we appreciate you for coming on today and sharing some of your wisdom and insight as a professional.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So again, that phone number is 1-800-273-8255 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I want to end with this quote. Again, just to remember that you really want to be able to know yourself and identify with maybe any challenges or any things you may be facing, because the earlier and the sooner you can identify those things, the more proactive and strategic you can be, and to set yourself up for a world of success. That's my time for today. Thanks for watching the Encouraging Word Show. Have a great day.